Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My dear brothers and sisters, viewers of Iqra TV and friends of Iqra TV, welcome to another edition of Real Talk. I'm your host Iqbal Bana. I hope you've all been safe and keeping well in this very difficult and challenging times that we're all having to go through this moment throughout the whole world. Over the last 2 weeks, as you will know very well, we have been concentrating on the issue of the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic that has struck the world, the whole population of the world, wherever we may be. Right at the beginning of the pandemic, just at the start of it, I did my program on the emerging pandemic and what this effect is likely to be on the community and in the world in general. And I was very deeply honored at that time to have with me Dr. Tahir Shaheen, who's a local GP in Bradford, also practices medicine at the NE department, and is a very active community member in the Bradford community. And he's done some sterling work around the community, telling people about the COVID pandemic, its effects on the community, its implications on the community, and what the community needed to do in terms of protecting themselves. Today, I am again deeply honored that he's very kindly agreed to take out some time from his very, very busy schedule and join me today, almost a year after the pandemic started. And I'm sure during that year, he has seen enormous amount of difficulty and challenges that all people have faced, and particularly those in the medical field as well. So I'm deeply honored that he has been able to join me today. Dr. Saab, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back. Thank you to have for coming again, as I say, taking this time out from your very busy schedule and helping make our viewers understand some of the difficulties and challenges that you as a professional have felt, this 12 months. It must have been very difficult and challenging for you.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Jazakallah khair, and thank you for inviting me once again onto the show.
It's our pleasure.
Absolutely, it seems just shy of 1 year really, me sitting here just at the outset of making the announcements to with assisting the masjids for closure. Unfortunately, it was a very grim and difficult time. A year has passed. It's been a very difficult, challenging and arduous year for many of us. Lots of people have lost loved ones, unfortunately. And unfortunately, that at the outset of the pandemic, this was something that was predicted. Alhamdulillah, I'm fortunate as yourself to say that we're still here today.
MashaAllah, by the grace of Allah, yes.
Alhamdulillah, and we've been able to be proactive during that time and provide whatever support we can. First and foremost, at the outset from the pandemic, myself, I think it's important to give the credit where it's really due, and myself alongside many of my colleagues, we developed a group called Al Markaz Medics,
right.
And we are very closely affiliated with Al Markaz Al Islami, which is in the heart of Bradford, and we set out a campaign very early, in fact, prior to all of the initial announcements and the lockdown announcements that were made, and we had a very clear message that absolutely this is something that's going to spiral out of control, and we were very, very concerned. And throughout the course of the journey, there's been a lot of ups and downs, but alhamdulillah, we have managed to put that information out there. We have managed to, in a sense, I would like to say, inshallah, we've been very productive in helping to save some lives. Working at the forefront, on the front line in terms of medicine, some of the memories that we've now got from this pandemic are things that we're going to have to live with for the rest of our life. It definitely is something as a doctor that you take away so many valuable lessons learned. There are mistakes that are made, there are things that you learn from, there are things that you correct. And so alhamdulillah, it's been a very difficult time for everybody, and I think it's important that we have peaks and troughs. At the start of the pandemic, we were very concerned about, again, an element of misinformation, whether there was a belief that actually this virus is real, whether it actually poses a genuine threat. And a year down the line, 100,000 deaths in our country, it's as real as it gets.
It can't get any more real than that, yeah. I mean, Bradford has suffered quite a lot of deaths as well, hasn't it? Over 1,000 people have passed away in Bradford, in that period of time.
Absolutely. So, you've seen efforts from, and the amazing thing about Bradford as a city, and I'm proud to say that, we belong here and we work as part of a much wider team, is that the community response, the organisations coming together, collectively working in all different, as a multidisciplinary team, has really helped people in the city come forward. And I'm sure, there are still some challenges that we face today, another hurdle related to the vaccine and how we move forward from this. And inshallah, I'm sure we'll be able to address some of the questions today.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, we have done 2 programs on the vaccine itself, and we will continue to have a discussion around that in a while as well. But I mean, in terms of, I know that I saw on the news, for example, that the Central Mosque were very proactive in putting in mechanisms in place. You had a disinfectant unit put in place, so people were able to come through the mosque, disinfect themselves, and then go in for prayer. And I know that in Bradford, the organisations were very proactive, that they very quickly said that mosque needs to shut down because this pandemic could spread. And unfortunately, as Dr. Shaheen said, that when we did the first program, I think in the first week of April, if I remember correctly, and you were with me, and we were telling people at that time, warning people that this is a pandemic that's not going to go away and it's going to affect people's lives, and everybody needed to protect themselves and to protect their loved ones as well. Now, in terms of that message, obviously did go through, although a lot of masjids and a lot of people were reluctant to stop going to the masjid, but by and large a lot of people observed the guidance that was given at that time, although there was a lot of questions asked. So as a medic, how did you support the community have a better understanding of what this evil sort of illness that is before the community, the world, is going to affect them? I mean, what sort of messaging did you have to do? Did you have to go Jummah prayers? I think you made alans as well. You made announcements in the masjid as well, didn't you?
Yeah, so we had a multifaceted approach, and I think it's very important when there's something of such a significant level that it's going to impact everybody and anybody, that it's important.
But did you think people at the beginning really understood what the impact would really be? Or did they dismiss it?
I think to be fair, credit where it's due to our city and our people. I think the people worked in a very timely fashion, and there's always going to be an element of question and doubt, and I don't blame them, because even at that point some of the scientists, people in medicine, even the government wasn't sure. So it's all been a work in progress, and there definitely was doubt at the outset, but then this is the benefit of having people in different fields, so people who are at the forefront and the front line in the hospitals. We could see the direct impact of what this virus was causing to our loved ones and people of our city, and we could then relay that information out. Commonly, it's quite drastic to describe them kind of situations to people who are non-medical, but at that point it was very important so people got a realistic picture, and we took a variety of different approaches. First and foremost, we did some announcements and if you like, a presentation at the Jummah prayers. We with the help of Council for Mosques were able to rally essentially every masjid in the city together and have a major meeting in which we essentially announced that the masjids would have to close.
I remember that on the night you came on my program, it was a Wednesday.
Absolutely.
You were leaving this place to go to the Council of Mosque meeting, where the decision was going to be made about how the mosques are going to respond to this particular the threat that we were all facing from the pandemic. Yeah. I mean, obviously the Council of Mosques has done a fantastic job, and I keep saying to people, especially in government, that the Bradford Council of Mosques is a role model of how the Muslim community should organize itself, in this country, how all faith communities within the Muslim faith structure need to work together collectively, because the enemy is quite common to us. The enemy did not distinguish between the sectorial issues within our community. Everybody was affected by it. But moving away from the immediate response, one of the issues, one of our viewers last week, Muhammad Aslam Saab from Pendle, Nelson rang, and he was talking about, obviously, unfortunately, we've seen a lot of people losing loved ones in the community and in their families. And in the past, as our tradition is and has our structure is, we have this unity of strength in our community. When somebody passes away, then the whole community comes around and provides support, counselling support, other forms of support. But because of the restrictions in the pandemic, that support has not really been there. I mean, I know you've been doing quite a lot of work around these issues as well. How do you think communities have fared without that support, enveloping them and putting arms around them?
So I think for particularly the South Asian community, okay, I think it's come to the surface even more how important that support mechanism that we actually took for granted possibly sometimes, how important that really is, particularly in a bereavement setting. And I think given, it's important to take a slight bird's eye view to this situation, as much as it's extremely difficult for the people who have lost a loved one and who are going through the bereavement. And it's important for them to come to terms a little bit with why certain things have happened. And I think, you know, the circumstances are absolutely genuine, because the last thing we want is somebody who's bereaved of a loved one, possibly the death attributed to COVID, is rather than we want to protect and support them as opposed to encourage a further infection within that same household. So I think it was very clear for people to understand why this is happening. However, it wasn't, you know, because when somebody loses somebody, this is a memory that's going to stick with them for the rest of their life. And the psychological impact of that, I think is important to note, because we're going to probably see the ongoing negative impact of that even after the pandemic. And many people may feel that this whole situation has become over-medicalized, and that empathy and that compassion has kind of gone missing, because at the end of the day we still are losing family members. And it's very difficult to we understand absolutely that element is a must. And I think we have to start to think about moving out of our comfort zone and trying to identify ways in which we can probably support these people, or which people can take that support slightly different, because the circumstances are unprecedented. So a good example I can give you is Alhamdulillah, as part of Al-Markazul Islami here in Bradford, when there was a huge question about people who were dying and how we were going to prepare for their burials, and there was a huge question there. Then the Al-Markaz medics, in combination with the ulama there, we were very instrumental in devising a manual as to what the fiqh principles are. And I think in these difficult times, it's very important to have a bedrock, a foundation which you can fall on, and faith for a lot of us was there.
Very important.
And so when they were able to fall back on some of the guidances coming from their own mosques or their imams, then that was one form of support for them. The other thing that I think particularly happens in Bradford, and I know this question is from a brother in Pendle, is that in Bradford, a lot of the communities were able to come together and organise like virtual events, because at the same time we want to protect that family, but we also want to show that family that the wider family and the community is with them.
I mean, I've not heard of the virtual events myself, so this is news to me.
Okay.
I mean, how easy was it to organise that? Was it easy for families to sort of link into the virtual events?
So I think absolutely. Again, I take the example for us last week. In fact, we had a COVID-related death, unfortunately, of a teacher at the Al-Markaz, and how we went about trying to support the family in that was to host a virtual dua. So the imams got together, and people who are affiliated with these organizations, then because of the advent of social media, it's all wildfire, the information, so people could log in. That way the family knew that a lot of people are doing dua and praying for them, and they know that they're there. But also it provides an opportunity to always pray for other people in the community who've passed away. So it gives that wider sense of support, and also particularly for that family, it makes them feel special. It gives.
So was this organized by the masjid itself, or or was it another organisation?
Yeah, so it was organised by the masjid, but this is one example of a masjid doing something of this nature. What a beautiful display of affection that was. But there are multiple organisations in Bradford who have been offering this kind of support, and I think they've kind of stepped in to bridge that gap. It's never going to be what it was, and we have to accept that, but we have to make do with the circumstances, and that's probably the next best thing.
Well, I mean, that is fascinating. As I say, I wasn't aware of this virtual sort of community support at the moment of somebody passing away, and that is something that I probably need to learn a little bit more about it. But in terms of you talked about the medical staff who have been at the forefront of the pandemic. There's no doubt about it. And in fact, as I mentioned in my previous two programs, some of the first people who passed away as a result of COVID were Muslim doctors, who were absolutely the front line, who gave their lives to this. Now, obviously, there's been a lot of talk about burnout in the professional staff as well, because they've been really firefighting constantly 24/7. There's no respite for them at all. I mean, how do you find staff coping with some of these challenges, both emotional and physical, that they are facing on a day-to-day basis?
So professionally, we've been able to understand and recognize this problem early on and anticipate it, in fact. So there's been various different approaches to help staff, things like regular huddles. So a lot of people have had to start fragmenting and working in different rooms or different buildings, and even some people working remotely at home. But in order to maintain that camaraderie, that team effort, and make sure everybody's checking in on everybody, they've organised things like huddles where social distancing XYZ is still being met, but at least it allows the person to just check in with others and let offload and see how they're getting on. It's also very important to understand that these people who are frontline healthcare professionals, they're also going through the same thing, including family relatives becoming unwell, passing away. So they have to deal with that emotion and that burden, as well as come to work and then help. For many people, that's been something that they're positively being able to return back, and help people, which makes them feel better. For some people, it's been extremely burdensome.
Do you find that when people volunteer, for helping the community in any shape or form, whether it's with pandemic, whether it's other things that they do, that actually provides that person with an emotional support network from themselves. So it helps them as a person to deal with things much more easily than they would if they're not doing anything at all. Do you find that happening in the community? Is that a sort of something that emotionally helps people?
I think that's really important, and it's nice to see. And a lot of people have come to the surface and are really helping out. I think it's important also to reflect on this, because sometimes this can be the source of a budding problem.
Right.
Because it's important amongst a profession, if you like, or a certain subsect, that you recognize limitations. And I think in this very emotional and turbulent time, everybody wants the best and everybody's trying to help. But it's also important that you recognize limitations. So, for example, if information becomes available, now that information may not be fully interpretable by everybody. Whereas people who are trying to be helpful may then misinterpret that information, and that can then become a source of a problem. So it's lovely that everybody comes together, and I strongly encourage that. But I think it's important that you continue to work within teams where there is, I suppose, some degree of leadership, some degree of specialty, so that you can stick to your own trades, and then the help is much more effective.
I mean, I remember when we first met, as I say, at the very beginning of the pandemic developing in this country, that one of the fears we had was the community not accepting that this is real. And there were lots of people, as you said in one of your responses, that there were people who were skeptical. Is it as bad as it's going to be? And unfortunately, it's proved to be worse than we thought it was going to be. I mean, that must have been a challenge for people like you in the medical profession, but also people like you who are very good, mashallah, practicing Muslims, to counter that narrative, which is quite rife in our community at that time. It still is to a certain extent when it comes to the vaccine, which we'll talk about. How did you tackle some of those issues? Because we had ulamas, we had learned people, within the community who were showing not necessarily taking on the seriousness of the impact of the pandemic. And I know you said you worked with the Council of Mosque, and that had a major impact. But I mean, how did you really manage to sort of work around those issues, navigate through some of this confusion that existed at the beginning?
I think this is where it's important to remain objective and not become emotionally drawn into things. And I think as a doctor, it's a responsibility amongst the community for all your patients and anybody who approaches to give them the knowledge and the understanding that you have from an evidence base. And I think it was important that we came to an understanding ourselves that with everything, not many people may not agree. But that's one thing that we are trained to understand, that it's not important that people fully listen in terms of agree with your decision, as long as there's rationale to their decision. And I think communicating this was a responsibility for us, and we felt best equipped to do that. I think it became very challenging and somewhat frustrating when there's a lot of opinions which are not backed up by evidence or experience, because then we worry about people in the community, because lots of people have different networks and are influenced by different sources of information.
So there was lots of misinformation on social media, which is still going on to a certain extent when it comes to the vaccine, etc. But how do you find, I mean, a lot of our community will follow whatever the imams tell them in the masjid. because the imams play a very important role, in transposing messages to the community. Did you find that at the very beginning you had to sign up with the majority of imams in Bradford and surrounding districts to the messages that you were putting out?
Absolutely. I think that's mandatory, really.
But I know there were some imams who were skeptical.
Yeah.
Who are, masjid kyun band kar di bhai? Ye to Allah ka ghar hai. Right? They were extremely skeptical.
Yeah.
Were not happy about mosque being closed, and so how did you navigate through people like those?
I think it's about open discussion and questions and answers. So we were very professionally hosted numerous different platforms for discussion. There were lots of people with differences of opinions, and it's important that we also listen to other people's opinion, work through them, answer what concerns they have, back that up with the evidence, and then we have to allow individuals their own autonomy to make their decision.
I mean, those negotiations must have been really, really, really interesting. I mean, I was hoping that my dear friend Zulfi Karim, who's the chair of the Council of Mosque, would be able to join us today, and I've been wanting him to come. Unfortunately, he has also been the victim of COVID. MashaAllah, by the grace of Allah, he's recovering. May Allah give us strength and give him total shifa. But I was hoping he was going to come, because he, with Dr. Shaheen and Ishtiyaq Ahmed and others, were at the forefront of bringing the Muslim community together, bringing all the mosques together, and coming up, as Dr. Shaheen says, with the manual of how we need to deal with this pandemic and what roles and responsibilities mosque and imams will need to take on in order to keep our communities safe and sound. At the end of the day, everything is dictated by Allah, but they played a vital role in this, and may Allah give them strength and bless them both in this world, all of them, and the world hereafter. I mean, if we talked about the role of the Council of Mosques. Not every town has got as good and as robust a Council of Mosques that Bradford luckily has. But the role of the imams, I know in other places where the imams play an important role. Did you find anybody who was reluctant to accept what you were saying, and therefore had to to do sort of different types of negotiations with them? Or was it that they only accepted the mandatory legal framework that was applied?
Yeah, I think our approach was mainly inclusive of the majority, so it was a consensus decision, and alhamdulillah we had a majority, as well as we focused particularly on the legalities to make sure nobody was out of the law, because that is against the tenet of our faith as well. And I think that's where we did get a lot of consensus and negotiation. So alhamdulillah, as we expected, it's about dealing with the majority and making sure there's a benefit for the greater numbers, and that's the approach that we took. And as the time got on and people became sick and the death rates increased, and unfortunately the graveyards became full, people started to realize that we need to really abide by this. And I again stand, as with every city, there's going to be some people who don't agree, but I think Bradford really had a commendable response, and even Professor Whitty made a reference to Bradford as well. So
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, Bradford did, I think, outshine a lot of other places in the way that as a community they came together, and supported each other and the wider community as well. It's the wider community we wanted to talk to you about in the next part of the program. I mean, the work that Dr. Zahir Shaheen has been doing is absolutely vital. We'll be going to a break now very soon. Inshallah, we'll be back very soon. Go and make yourself a tea, coffee, whatever it is. As I say, faluda, whatever you want to do. And because, as Dr. Zahir Shaheen says, there's a lot to talk about, and we haven't even really touched about the vaccine as we've done over the last 2 weeks, but we'll come back to that. In the meantime, as I say, if you have any questions that you want to ask Dr. Zahir Shaheen, or anything else you want to talk about, feel free to contact the number that comes up on your screen, and then we'd like to hear your thoughts, your ideas, your concerns and your hopes, so we can talk to Dr. Shaheen and he get his views as well. So as I say, take care, come back, inshallah we'll be joining you with you soon. Take care, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.